In the floor of the Adriatic Sea, off the coast of Croatia, there is a steel pile the height of a 40-story building, fabricated in China, driven into the seabed, and holding up a bridge built for €420 million. €357 million of it paid by European Union taxpayers, the remaining €63 million by Croatia. It is the longest steel-driven pile in the history of civil engineering. It's one of 150 steel piles beneath the Pelješac Bridge, the first major EU-funded infrastructure project inside the European Union ever built by a Chinese state company, on a contract won by undercutting every European competitor on price. The bridge opened in 2022. Inspectors found cracks in 2024. And none of those three facts are the most important thing about this story. Croatia has a geography problem. A 9-kilometre strip of Bosnian coastline sits right in the middle of the road between Split and Dubrovnik, and until 2022, every vehicle driving that route had to clear 2 international border crossings just to travel within a single country. Croatia joined the European Union in 2013, which guaranteed free movement across 27 countries, but not across your own coast. The Pelješac Bridge wasn't just a transportation fix. It was the last piece of being a complete country. The EU agreed. In June 2017, the European Commission approved the funds and put the contract out to open international tender. Any qualified company on Earth could bid. What happened next? Nobody had anticipated. When the sealed bids were opened in 2017, China Road and Bridge Corporation, CRBC, came in at €279 million. The next cheapest bid, from an Italian-Turkish consortium called Astaldi Ichthys, was €343 million. Austrian construction giant Strabag bid €351 million. CRBC undercut its closest rival by 20% on a project that meant building across open water in an active earthquake zone with bedrock sitting hundreds of feet below the sea floor. Strabag immediately filed a formal complaint. The case rested on several specific line items in the Chinese bid where the price gap with the European competitors ran into the dozens of times. The clearest example involved excavated soil disposal. CRBC quoted the work at around €76,000. Strabag had quoted the same work at nearly €1.9 million, a 96% gap on a single line item in a public tender. The Croatian state procurement regulator reviewed the appeal and rejected it. The Italian-Turkish consortium got thrown out on a bank guarantee technicality. In April 2018, CRBC signed the formal construction contract. And with that signature, the precedent was set. For the first time in history, a Chinese state-owned construction company had won a major EU-funded public tender inside European Union borders. Now, CRBC had to actually build the thing. And what was waiting for them beneath the surface of Marliston Bay was a different problem entirely. From the air, Marliston Bay looks calm. Underneath, it's an engineering nightmare. The average seabed depth along the bridge alignment runs around 27 meters. Things get worse the deeper you go. The top layer of marine sediment is extremely soft clay, basically incapable of holding weight. Below that, more clay and silt. Below those layers, transitional zones of locally cemented clays. The hard limestone bedrock, the only thing solid enough to anchor a major bridge to, sits anywhere from 12 to 110 meters below the sea floor, depending on where you measure. The solution was tubular steel piles, 2 meters in diameter with walls up to 60 millimeters thick, fabricated in China and shipped across 2 oceans. A total of 150 of these piles went into the seabed. More than 70% of them ran over 100 meters long. The single longest pile, at 130.6 meters, weighed approximately 255 tons and set a worldwide record for the longest steel-driven pile ever used in civil engineering. For perspective, that's the height of a 40-story building, fabricated in one piece and hammered vertically into the floor of a bay. The total steel in the bridge structure exceeded 70,000 tons, enough to build 10 Eiffel Towers. Driving those piles created a different problem. Marliston Bay is a European Union protected marine environment and home to oyster and shellfish beds. Pile-driving shockwaves underwater can rupture fish organs and wipe out beds in a single afternoon. So, before any hammering started, CIBC laid down a perforated tube network on the seabed and pushed high-pressure air through thousands of holes. The result was a vertical wall of microbubbles. Air and water have different acoustic properties, and the boundary layer absorbed and scattered the sound. The oyster beds came through, the seagrass came through, the pile driving still got finished on schedule. Wind was the next problem to solve. The Bora is a brutal, cold, downslope wind that hits the Adriatic coast in winter, and gusts at this stretch of coast were measured at around 180 km per hour during the construction window. At those speeds, a bridge deck faces something called vortex shedding, where alternating low-pressure zones pull the structure back and forth perpendicular to the wind. Vortex shedding is what destroyed the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in 1940. The Peltisac deck was designed with a streamlined trapezoidal box girder cross-section and aerodynamic edge cornices, essentially structural spoilers that break up the airflow before it can resonate with the bridge. The stay cables were sheathed in high-density polyethylene with helical ribbing for the same reason. The concrete spec mattered just as much. The 6 central pylons were cast using a self-compacting high-strength mix rated C70-85, then coated with a silane impregnation sealer designed to keep salt water out of the rebar. The design life on paper is at least 100 years, with some of the corrosion protection documentation pushing that figure higher. Each of those numbers rests on a single condition. The concrete had to cure properly during the pour. Before going further, here is what Croatian authorities have made clear. The bridge remains structurally sound. In March 2026, Ivica Budimir, chairman of the board of Hrvatski Cest, the state road authority, confirmed that comprehensive structural analyses had been completed and the bridge was stable, safe, and open to traffic. But in October 2024, a routine inspection turned up surface cracks running across several of the bridge's concrete pylons. Civil engineer Davor Peric, who works for Croatian Roads, went on Nova TV and explained the situation calmly. The damage was confined to the surface, caused by concrete shrinkage during curing and common on new structures. The technical cause is something called plastic shrinkage. When fresh concrete is poured, it has to hold onto its surface water long enough to cure properly. In Dalmatia, the sun and the dry wind off the Adriatic can pull that water out too quickly. The concrete sets unevenly and tiny cracks open up across the surface. On a sidewalk, that's a cosmetic issue. On a marine bridge, it gets worse. Salt spray rolls in off the Adriatic constantly. Salt carries chloride ions. Chloride ions travel through cracks in the concrete, reach the steel reinforcement underneath, and start corroding it. The corroding steel then expands, which pushes more concrete outward, which opens up more cracks, which lets more salt in. A bridge engineered for a century of service can have that timeline shortened significantly if surface cracks get ignored. The real danger here is slow attrition, the sea quietly eating the skeleton from the inside. And here's the thing, China pays for all of it. When the CIBC signed the construction contract, they also signed a 10-year warranty. The bridge opened in mid-2022, which means about 6 years of warranty coverage remain as of mid-2026. The October 2026 repair plan calls for crews to grind back the affected concrete down to the main reinforcement layer, resurface it, and apply a marine-grade polyurethane sealant. The work will run after the tourist season. At least one lane will stay open the whole time, and every euro of repair cost lands on a contractor's books rather than Croatia's. This also answers a question that shows up in the comments under every video about this bridge. How did China build something like this for under 500 million euro, when the United Kingdom's HS2 high-speed rail line is on track to cost well over £100 billion. Several factors closed the gap. Labour arbitrage played a role, with Chinese workers paid Chinese wages on Croatian sites. State subsidy played another, with a state-owned contractor freed from the need to price for shareholder profit. Scope matters as well, since a 2.4-kilometre bridge sits in an entirely different category from over 200 kilometres of high-speed rail through one of the most regulated planning systems in the world. And corners cut on durability finish out the math, invisible on opening day, visible in October 2024. Here is what Brussels got wrong and what Beijing got exactly right. On opening day, July 26, 2022, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang appeared by video link at the inauguration ceremony. His face was on the big screen. The Croatian president, the Prime Minister, the Speaker of Parliament, all of them were there. To anyone watching, the visual story was simple. China built this, and Croatia was grateful. What the crowd did not see was the transaction underneath that image. The European Union had paid €357 million of the construction cost. A Chinese state company had taken the contract, delivered the bridge, and collected the credit. And now it had something more valuable than the money it had been paid. It had a reference. In public procurement, a reference is proof that you have already done the job. It's the first thing any client asks for. Before Pelgisac, no Chinese state construction company had a completed EU-funded infrastructure project inside European Union borders on its resume. After Pelgisac, CRBC did. Within months of the contract being awarded, Chinese firms submitted bids on Croatian ports, roads, and rail lines. The Croatian Prime Minister, standing at the bridge opening, told reporters he saw no reason why Pelgisac shouldn't serve as an excellent reference for CRBC in future tenders across EU member states. The head of a European government had just handed China a business card funded by European taxpayers. The numbers show what happened next. In 2020, while the bridge was still under construction and the reference was already being circulated, Chinese companies won nearly €2 billion in European public tenders. That was more than double any previous year on record. Brussels noticed. In June 2022, the same month the Pelgisac Bridge opened, the European Union adopted the International Procurement Instrument, a new rule giving Brussels the power to block foreign companies from EU tenders if their home country does not give European firms the same access in return. 5 months later, the Foreign Subsidies Regulation gave the Commission the power to investigate companies that had been subsidised by foreign governments before bidding on EU contracts. Both instruments were designed to close the exact gap that the Pelgisac tender had exposed. Both cited that gap by name, and both arrived after the bridge was already open, the reference was already filed, and the precedent was already set. China did not need to own the Pelgisac Bridge to win. It needed to build it. The bridge was the proof of concept. The credential was the prize, and Europe paid for both. The Croatian family driving south along the Adriatic stays focused on the road ahead. They cross the Pelgisac Bridge in a couple of minutes without any border, queue or passport. The bridge does what it was built to do. In October 2026, Chinese engineers will return to the bridge they built. They will come back on their own bill, under their own warranty, to repair cracks that formed because the concrete was rushed through curing. Croatian inspectors will watch. European officials will watch. And the broader argument that started here will keep running, because the story has outgrown the bridge itself. It became a question about who gets to build Europe, and what Europe is willing to trade for a short queue and a fast drive to Dubrovnik. For China, the win came from building the Pelgisac Bridge. Ownership would have been beside the point. So here is a question worth thinking about. If a foreign state-owned company can outbid every domestic competitor on price, deliver the structure ahead of schedule, and take public credit for the result, should EU public money still be allowed to pay for that? Drop your honest take in the comments. I read every single one of them. Subscribe for more Megabuild stories.